We off?
30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes.
Like Doc slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome, I'm Roger Stone, and this is The Roger Stone Show. You're here on 77 WABC, the most powerful, dynamic, influential, and entertaining AM radio station in the world. If you don't live in the greater New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, where you can hear us at 770 on the AM dial, you can always listen to us at WABCradio.com, where we are live streaming worldwide. I believe we're in 163 countries last time I looked. So there's never any excuse for missing The Roger Stone Show, which is emerging very quickly as the hottest political commentary show in the country. So thanks for joining us. Just as you thought America was safe and thought that we were about to turn the corner on the excesses of the Democrats who had driven the country to the highest gasoline prices we'd seen in decades, the highest rate of inflation, who had opened our borders to hordes of illegal immigrants bringing crime and drugs and pestilence and fentanyl to our country, also destroying the budgets of states and counties that are required by law to provide services for these illegals. Just as we began to believe the long nightmare of lawfare was over, we learn that Democrats in the House, led by Congressman Jamie Raskin, have a plan to delay the election or the certification of the election of President Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Judge Juan Merchan, just days ago, refused to dismiss the case in his court against President Donald Trump based on the Supreme Court's ruling regarding presidential immunity. These are the continuing lawfare potential threats to the Trump presidency, and the threat in the House is exacerbated by the fact that the speakership is in question and Republicans only have control by 3 seats. Joining me now to discuss this and more is David Schoen. David Schoen is one of the most distinguished criminal defense lawyers in the country. He is really that rare lawyer which understands not just the law and the proceedings in a courtroom, but who recognizes the impact of external factors such as media coverage have in any case and in the public's perception of those cases. David Schoen has a long history of working for civil liberties and civil rights, particularly in ballot access cases. He is a man whose whose legal judgment I respect without parallel. David, thank you so much for joining us today on the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you very much for having me. Always an honor.
So, David, let's start, since all politics is local, let's start with the decision by Judge Juan Merchan not to dismiss the case against President Donald Trump based on the Supreme Court's decision regarding presidential immunity. We now, it seem poised on the cusp of a time when Trump is on the verge of being sworn in, most improbably, as our next president. But this judge still seems to be determined to put him in jail. What's going on here?
Yeah, well, there are two immunity issues, really, before Merchan. What Merchan said is that he rejected the idea of what we call official acts immunity, and that's the decision from the Supreme Court that you were referring to that said that the president cannot be charged criminally for official acts. The evidence in the New York case showed that the grand jury was subjected to evidence of official acts, and the trial jury was exposed to evidence of official acts, which should have tainted the entire proceedings and should have required that they be dismissed, but not according to Judge Merchan. He found the evidence was otherwise overwhelming and minimized the impact of this, basically ignoring the immunity decision from the United States Supreme Court while trying to write around it, but in a tortured way. I think that decision has to be overturned, on appeal. The other kind of immunity is the immunity arising from the President Trump's election as president. As you know, there's a Department of Justice longstanding memo that piggybacked on a 1973 memo saying that we cannot indict or continue the criminal process against a sitting president. Now, of course, that's binding only on the United States Justice Department, but all of the principles underlying that memo apply to a state prosecution also, including separation of powers arguments and an additional argument under the Supremacy Clause. We don't have one state's proceedings interfering with national policy and the conduct of the national government. So we'll see what he says about that. But in any event, President Trump's going to have a decision to make, I think, and that is that I believe Judge Merchan is going to go with the prosecution's idea that he should hold this case in abeyance for 4 years until after the presidency is concluded. I think it's an outrageous idea. I think it violates the principles of the Department of Justice memo, including the distraction it causes, including the cloud it puts over the presidency in dealing with foreign powers, and so on. And I don't think there's any legitimate basis for it. In that event, I think the President Trump's going to have to make a decision that maybe he could waive immunity and go forward to sentencing. Merchan certainly cannot sentence him to prison. Everyone seems to recognize that at this point, even as president-elect, certainly as president in office. And I say under the President-elect Transition Act, he also can't. But in any event, and then just appeal all of the issues in this ridiculous case to get the thing thrown out once and for all. That's one decision he could make.
Yeah, the catch-22 seems to be that until he's sentenced, he cannot appeal the case. Correct?
I think that's right. Until he's sentenced, there's no final judgment in the case, and then there's no judgment having been entered to be appealed. However, he probably could take an interlocutory appeal on the immunity issue, and potentially could take it to federal court. Apart from the other issues, I think in some ways it makes sense to appeal the entire decision. The case was flawed from the start. The jury was never told what the so-called target crime that purportedly made it a felony was. They were given a bunch of choices, and it's impossible to defend against a case like that. The defendant is entitled to know exactly what criminal conduct he was charged with doing, and therefore what the mental state was involved in all that. In this case, he was charged with a misdemeanor of so-called falsifying business records, becomes a felony only when it's done to commit another crime or conspire to commit another crime or cover up another crime. They never identified what that alleged other crime was. It could have been a tax offense, could have been an election offense. Very different defenses very different defenses apply to each of those offenses.
If you're just tuning in, we're talking to David Schoen, criminal defense attorney who represented President Donald Trump in one of the two failed impeachment attempts on the president. You may recall Counselor Schoen is the man who showed the video on the floor of the U.S. Senate of multiple Democrats calling for violence, demonstrating that their attempt to hold President Trump to a different standard was flawed. In this past week, Jamie Raskin, who kind of tipped the world off several months ago when he said that under Section 3 of Article the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, that Trump was, in his opinion, ineligible to be president, and that he intended to lead a move in the House to thwart the certification of his election on that basis. That was followed by a substantial piece published by The Hill, written by two lawyers, Evan Davis and David Schulte, who I'm not familiar with. And they make an extremely convoluted case that despite the fact that no federal court of law has convicted Donald Trump of insurrection, indeed he's never been charged with it, that it could still be used as the basis to deny his certification as president. So, David, I'm going to ask you to kind of walk us through their arguments. And then you had a stunning piece at Gateway Pundit, which I think rebutted all of that. Tell us what they claim and why they are wrong.
All right, and let me start by saying how very troubling this premise is, especially coming from Jamie Raskin, who was supposedly outraged when President Trump asked for a pause in order to challenge election integrity, examine it, investigate it. And we know that all of the lawfare that flowed from that. Back up before that, Jamie Raskin and colleagues questioning President Trump's original election in the case. It's just outrageous. But Section 14, Amendment 14, Section 3 does not provide a basis for disqualifying President Trump, as they say, from holding office. It's quite frankly, I hate to say this, but part of the blame goes to the lawyers who represented President Trump in the 14th Amendment case for making the argument originally that the Section 3 doesn't bar a candidate from running for office, appearing on the ballot. It only bars them from holding office. That kind of opened the door for these guys to make their cockamamie argument. But first and foremost, understand what Jamie Raskin and these writers are trying to do is thwart the will of the American people, literally steal your vote, steal the power of the ballot box, contravene every principle regarding election law that I'm familiar with from the United States Supreme Court, going back to the 1800s, certainly. But what we've been told, Lincoln told us, the elections belong to the people. The Supreme Court in 1979 told us voting is the most fundamental significance under our constitutional structure. These folks are trying to rob this. Jerry Nadler said it in 2019 in the first impeachment thing. We have to find a way to get rid of President Trump. We can't trust the voters. As anti-democratic a statement as I can imagine. But specifically, what these guys write in their Hill piece is that, you see, there's evidence to prove Section 3 bars a person who was involved with insurrection who committed insurrection from holding public office in the future. So in this case, there is absolutely no evidence that supports President Trump was engaged in insurrection or wanted anything whatsoever to do with it. These guys point to the Colorado case itself, for example. They say, he was found to be prohibited from running based on the Colorado Supreme Court's review of the case. The problem with that is there were no rules of evidence there. There was no competent evidence provided. You had one judge make a decision on a ridiculous record in the case that he wasn't competent to make, and it runs afoul of what the Supreme Court said when considering this issue in Trump versus Anderson. That is, we don't let one state affect the national election. That's a principle as old as Anderson versus Calabrese and otherwise. So that doesn't provide any basis. Then they argue, the second impeachment trial provides it because, he wasn't really charged with insurrection, but he was charged, one of the articles of impeachment, for inciting an insurrection, that sort of thing. Problem they had is President Trump won the second impeachment trial. They say, a majority of senators voted for conviction. It doesn't matter whether one voted, anything less than 2/3, he's acquitted. It would be like saying, as I wrote in that piece, that we have a criminal jury that requires a unanimous verdict, but we found that they were hung 7-5, therefore the defendant is guilty. That's not how our system works. We're a system of laws, and we must follow those principles. And so,
David, let me stop you there. If you're just tuning in, folks, we're listening to David Schoen, criminal defense attorney who has ably represented President Donald Trump in the past. This is the Roger Stone Show. Don't go away because we'll be right back.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Healthcare professionals can lead their careers with LinkedIn. Discover jobs by specialty, preferred shifts, and even desired salary. From mental health therapists to radiology technicians, it's now faster and easier for healthcare professionals to find the right fit. Learn more at linkedin.com/healthcare. Side effects may include faster job placement, improved work-life balance, and increased career satisfaction.
The rural way of life is about making everyone feel at home. Tractor Supply chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business to transform intelligent customer service. Together, we put the power of AI to work across 2,200 stores, keeping things running seamlessly inside, curbside, and countryside. This is elevated customer experience. This is Tractor Supply with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
Home means something different to everyone. But with Rocket Mortgage, home can mean even more. It can mean a college education, taming your high-interest debt, even a renovation. We've made it easier than ever to use your home equity. That home you worked so hard for, now it can work hard for you. Call 800-4ROCKET or visit rocket.com to find out more.
Rocket Mortgage, LLC, licensed in all 50 states, NMLSconsumeraccess.org, number 3030.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
And we're back with criminal defense attorney David Schoen, who very ably represented President Donald Trump in one of the two impeachments. Just a little while, we're going to be taking your calls. That number is 800-848-9222, 800-848-9222. Whether the subject is politics, news, history, or food, I'm happy to take your calls. Again, that number, 800-848-9222. Now back to David Schoen. Counselor Schoen, you were telling us as to why the argument put forward by these two attorneys and Jamie Raskin that Trump's election could not be certified on the basis that he had engaged in insurrection has no basis in law. We're interrupted by the commercial break, and we'll let you pick it up from there.
Great. So, there are many, many reasons. We're just covering a few of them today. But to continue, the third reason that these writers say President Trump should be disqualified for having engaged in insurrection because of the findings of the January 6th committee. If it weren't such a serious subject, that would be the most laughable and outrageous of all of their arguments. That was a completely sham committee that did a horrible disservice to the American people. They chose as a chair for that committee Benny Thompson, who himself sued President Trump over the events of January 6th, claiming he was personally injured by them, and then was appointed chair of a committee to investigate the cause of those events. Outrageous. The protocol was violated. House protocol was violated by the composition of the committee. They refused to seat the people that the Republican leader insisted be on the committee. They refused to consider other evidence besides evidence on their own agenda. Each member of the committee held press conferences during it with their findings when they were supposed to be investigating. It was a political sham and did a horrible disservice. Beyond all of that, there are technical arguments why Section 3 of the 14th Amendment cannot be applied to disqualify President Trump. 1869, Griffin's case, Justice Salmon Chase from the Supreme Court wrote that the Section 3 is not self-executing, meaning there is a Section 5 to the 14th Amendment, too, that talks about the power of Congress to enact enforcing legislation. Section 1 talks about the right to due process, and the Fifth Amendment is the federal right to due process. We don't know, based on the language of Section 3, what the burden of proof would be, what constitutes insurrection, what the process would be for disqualification. We can't do that after the fact and now try to disqualify President Trump. And I'll tell you another reason. Jack Smith, who was, as biased a prosecutor as there is, showed horrible judgment in each case he's handled, the prominent cases, McDonald case, Edwards case, and this case, Trump case, all that. He had every opportunity to charge President Trump with insurrection in the D.C. case. In fact, there's a group of so-called shadow prosecutors operating behind the scene who presented a memo suggesting what President Trump should be charged with, and they suggested and urged that he be charged under the federal insurrection statute. And as biased the prosecutor, Jack Smith, never charged him with that. He knew there was no insurrection. He knew no grand jury could find insurrection. And so they can't now, after the fact, piggyback it. But what's most troubling about all of this is just how tone-deaf Jamie Raskin and these writers are, and anyone who would support this position. President Trump just won the national election by a landslide. This is what the American people want. The congressmen like Raskin are nothing more than representatives of the American people. The vote, as the Supreme Court has said, Abe Lincoln said, and many others have said with authority, voting is our most powerful tool to determine our government.
Yeah, you see a complete change in our norms, however. So, for example, the U.S. Senate's authority to advise and consent to cabinet positions is supposed to mean that the senators pass judgment on the narrow question of the qualifications of the nominee, not their political philosophy, not their political track record. I would point out that President Biden and the Democrats had 50 votes in the U.S. Senate, not a majority at the time he became president. Yet every one of his cabinet appointees was confirmed with bipartisan support. Now, suddenly, we are raising political questions. It's outrageous to me that former FBI Director William Webster, who is 100 years old, releases a letter, or sends a letter, I guess, to one U.S. senator, saying that Kash Patel, who has a distinguished record as a federal prosecutor, prosecuting intelligence cases, over 60 of them, a distinguished record as the former chief of staff to the U.S. Department of Defense. That is a massive management job. Massive, not only position on the national security staff of President Donald Trump, but senior counsel to the House Intelligence Committee, the man who conducted the Russian collusion hoax on behalf of the Republican majority and Chairman Devin Nunes, is unqualified because he's, quote unquote, too political. Does anyone really think at age 100, William Webster, who was FBI director under Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, actually read that letter, never mind wrote that letter? This is the total politicization of the process as I see it. The real danger, David, is that this House majority is extraordinarily narrow. And therefore, initially, when I read these stories, particularly the story on the Hill, and I saw the boasting of Jamie Raskin, I didn't think too much of it. But the instability that would be caused by inner House Republican bickering could be extraordinarily dangerous, could delay, if nothing else, the certification of the election. The House cannot take an action until it has elected a speaker to preside. And at least one congressman, Thomas Massey of Kentucky, has already announced that he will not vote for Speaker Johnson. It is thought that Congresswoman Victoria Spartz of Indiana yet may be a second. There's a very, very real danger here of instability in the House, which could actually delay the president's certification.
You're 100% right, and it's very discouraging and very sad to see. It's time now to come together. The country made a monumental decision and elected him by a landslide. The speakership is, quite frankly, secondary to the business of the Senate in putting the government in place that was just elected. So they're going to have to come together and pick a speaker, and I would be shocked if at least some Democrats didn't oppose this action proposed by Jamie Raskin and these writers. It's the ultimate hypocrisy after all they've done to President Trump over the last 4 years, based on an interpretation of the Electoral Count Act. If they now refuse to certify, or even delayed certifying the election results, they should be thrown out of office if they do such a thing to try to thwart the will of the American people, exercised through the vote, which is the heart of our constitutional structure.
So, David, you know Pam Bondi. You worked with her on the president's defense in one of the impeachment trials. What is your view of the decision to appoint her as Attorney General?
Look, she's got. She actually worked the first impeachment. I did the second impeachment, but I know the people who worked with her. I know people who've worked with her for many years. She has a stellar record as Attorney General of a major state in Florida. There's no possible way the Senate could not confirm her based on a finding that she's not qualified, based on exercising the proper role of their advice and consent. But, as you say, they allow politics to enter into it. I don't think she's going to have a bit of a problem sailing through the confirmation process. And it's a big job. It's a big job for anyone to handle. But there's no reason to believe she's not up to that job and to run the Department of Justice capably and to hopefully eliminate so many of the political considerations that weighed into prosecutorial decisions and so on in this last administration. Unfortunately, Merrick Garland, who I've had great respect for as a judge, I had a case before him. Unfortunately, he has succumbed to the temptation, I suppose, that must exist to become a political hack once you take office. He absolutely ruined his reputation for any reasonable observer in this case. And one prime example would be his claim that the interview, the videotape of the interview between President Trump and Robert Hur, the special counsel, is somehow covered by executive privilege. The transcript had already been released. Everyone knows why Merrick Garland refused to release that videotape. It's all very clear now about President Biden's condition. And it's outrageous that he's playing those political games as the Attorney General of the United States. I expect to see something very different from Ms. Bondi.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that question. I saw this piece in the Wall Street Journal 5 or 6 days ago in which they essentially admitted that they themselves had been lying about this to us, about Joe Biden's physical and mental state for actually years. And you'll recall that when it was revealed that Richard Nixon had recorded all of his Oval Office conversations, he argued that was protected by executive privilege. And interestingly enough, he released a transcript. But the transcript was not acceptable to either the Congress nor the courts, and he was ultimately ordered to turn over the actual tapes. Why then should the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, not provide the actual audio of the interview between Special Counsel Robert Hur and Joe Biden? I think we have our answer. Joe Biden said this week that he regretted dropping out of the race. He didn't drop out of the race. He was forced out of the race by Barack Obama. He thinks he would have won. I don't think so. I think Donald Trump would have beaten him like a drum. Anyway, let me thank our guest, David Schoen, for joining us today on the Roger Stone Show. David, it is always refreshing and educational to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the service you're doing with this show.
All right, folks, we're going to be taking your calls. Again, that number, 800-848-9222, 848-9222. It's obviously a toll-free call at 800-848-9222. What do you want to talk? Politics, history? Yes, coming up, folks, I'm going to give you my recipe for my mother's Hungarian chicken soup. By popular demand, we'll have that recipe for you momentarily. This is the Roger Stone Show. Don't go away. And let me remind you, if you don't live in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, you can listen to the show by going to WABCRadio.com. We are, without any question, the most powerful, the most entertaining, the most dynamic, and I would say, the most influential AM radio station anywhere on the face of the planet. And we're delighted that you chose to spend your Sunday afternoon with us. We'll be right back.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.